In this lesson, we're going to round out our overview of web services by focusing on the pluses and minuses of SOAP-based services. To begin, what I'd like to do is to contrast client-service interaction in SOAP as opposed to REST. So to that end, you see on the screen in my Emacs editor the working file soapoverview.txt. What I've depicted right at the very top is basically the client-service interaction. So for example, from the client side, a request goes out to a SOAP-based service as a posted SOAP document. In other words, the HTTP verb is post. That's because a post request has a body. A GET request, for example, does not. And the SOAP document becomes the payload of the HTTP body. The service on the server side then does whatever processing is appropriate, and what the client gets in return is another SOAP document. So that SOAP document, the response document, is the body of the HTTP response. And then the client does whatever processing is appropriate. Now let's turn to the pluses and minuses. I've listed only one minus. You could spell this out in more detail, but for now, one is enough because this is the major minus. SOAP-based services compared to REST-based or REST-style services represent an additional layer of software. So I've depicted that down here. Let's say a client is going to send off to a service a list of products. That's the argument, if you like, passed in the request. And what the client wants to get back is a list of prices for those products. So what you can see in the depiction is that there's a SOAP library in play on both the request and the response side. So for example, the SOAP library is going to take that Java list of products, convert it into XML, send it over the wire to the service. The service is going to respond in XML, perhaps in JSON, but more commonly in SOAP and XML. And a SOAP library is then going to convert that XML into a Java list of prices. So what we have is added complexity. And in programming, added complexity is always a bit worrisome. There are, however, some considerable pluses that offset these minuses. For me, personally, the most important one is the first that I've listed. So in what I'm going to call routine exchanges, which should be the vast majority of exchanges between the client and the service, there's no need on the client side to parse any XML. Indeed, on the client side, the XML remains mostly transparent. The client code never sees it. Similarly, the client API is high level in the sense that the client simply calls functions. So for example, to get a list of prices for some products, the client might call a function called getProductPrices or something like that. So the web service calls tend to look just like ordinary function calls in whatever language you happen to be using. Finally, and this is another significant benefit, it seems to me, there are utilities to generate basic client code per service. This is because SOAP-based services come with a so-called service contract. It's called a WSDL document. We'll study it in detail later. And that document can be used with utilities to generate most of the boilerplate client-side code. This concludes then our first comparison and contrast of REST-style services with SOAP-based services. For the moment, our attention is on the REST-style ones. And what we're going to look at next are Java frameworks for doing REST-style services.